Welcome to our second session of Climate, Grief, and Growth, which is co-hosted by Reimagine and the Good Grief Network. My name is Andrew Engel, and I'm Senior Programmer at Reimagine. My pronouns are he, him. I've got glasses, a flannel checkered shirt, and a bright orange wall behind me, and some sun is coming in to my right from the window. Reimagine's mission is to help all people face adversity, loss, and mortality, and channel the hard parts of life into meaningful action and growth. In a few minutes, I'm going to be handing this over to my colleague, LaUra Schmidt at Good Grief Network, and our special guest, Kaira Jewel Lingo. LaUra is the founder of Good Grief Network, a nonprofit organization that brings people together to process collective grief, eco-distress, and overwhelming feelings concerning collective planetary crises. And she's the author of a forthcoming book in August called How to Live in a Chaotic Climate, 10 Steps to Reconnect with Ourselves, our Communities, and our Planet. Next Wednesday, LaUra will close out the Climate, Grief, and Growth series with a workshop that will feature creative exercises to honor our losses and to process eco-distress and climate grief. For the next half hour, LaUra will be in dialogue with Buddhist teacher Kaira Jewel Lingo. Kaira Jewel's lineages include the late spiritual leader, poet, and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vipassana tradition, secular mindfulness, and her father's justice work with Martin Luther King Jr. She is the author of We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons in Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption. Earlier, I mentioned Reimagine's explorations of post-traumatic growth. I often stress that there are spiritual traditions that have suggested similar ideas to PTG. And I often cite Thich Nhat Hanh's concept of no mud, no lotus as an example of that. So I'm eager to hear what Kaira Jewel has to say about that. You can read more about our speakers on the event link you used to register and in the links we'll be posting in the chat. LaUra, hello. Last week, you did some excellent moderating of a discussion on climate, grief, and growth with a climate psychologist named Leslie Davenport, Kyle Hill, who is a Native American public health scholar, and a London-based activist named Tori Choi. And one of my main takeaways from that conversation was the importance of being in community as we try to navigate climate grief. And I'm curious what some of your thoughts were on that session that you moderated.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Grateful to be here. Hello, everyone. Last week was such a rich conversation. There were so many ideas that I'm still sitting with. One of the ideas that I continuously come back to is the idea that we have to reconnect with our kin. Part of this great predicament we're facing is disconnection from each other and from the more than human world. And part of the healing process requires us to come back into relationship with the whole Earth community as well as each other. And so we'll start reconnecting with ourselves, which is what we'll explore today here with Kaira Jewel. The two of us will be in dialogue together for a little while, and then afterwards we're going to go into peer-led breakout groups to discuss a few questions. I'm wondering, Kaira Jewel, will you lead us in a short meditation to kick us off?
Sure. Shall we do that now?
Yes, please.
All right. So good to be with you all. Glad to have this chance to delve into an area that is so important for us individually and for our world, both grief and also how we can mindfully skillfully meet the reality of this moment. My dog is in the background. Hopefully it won't be too difficult for us. So I think one of the key areas that we can all bring awareness to as we encounter the grief of this time is our bodies. We experience grief in our bodies. And we can, in this practice that I'll offer us, practice coming home to ourselves and to this moment, which is the moment that we always are able to live in. We get in trouble when we worry about how we're going to live in the future moment, or when we regret or try to change how we lived in a previous moment. But this moment is something we are actually capable of meeting. So we'll practice being in our bodies, we'll practice being with what's happening right here and now in this practice. So I invite you to take whatever position will support you. It could be seated, it could be standing, it could be lying down. I think this will just be for about 5 minutes. Yeah. So just let yourself feel into your body. Like if someone asked you, maybe an alien from outer space, how do you know that you're alive right now? How would you answer? How do you know that you have a body? And what does that feel like? To remember that you have a body. Maybe it's taking 3 of the deepest breaths you've taken all day that helps you remember that. If you like to do that with me, we can do that together. So a deep inhale all the way to the bottom of the lungs, and then a slow exhale. And 2 more breaths like that if you like. And letting your breathing return to its normal rhythm. And just noticing how that feels, what the effects of that deeper breathing are. And then maybe another way you might respond to this question of how do you know you are alive is to feel the volume of your body, to feel the whole 3-dimensional space that your body takes up, from your feet to the top of your head, the front, the back, the sides of the body. the places your body is making contact with whatever is supporting you. And really letting yourself occupy this space fully. Maybe even inviting your body to expand into this space, to really be here fully. And if there are any parts of you that are somewhere else, some other place or some other time, gently inviting them to come back here and now, so that you can fully take your seat, embody this wonder of a body. Maybe another way you would answer this question, how do you know you are alive, is to notice what's happening at the different sense doors. The sense of touch, pressure, clothing on your skin, the temperature of the air on your skin. The sounds that you are aware of. There's my voice. There may be sounds in your environment. I'm hearing birds and traffic and wind outside. There is sight, whether your eyes are open. You may be taking in forms, shapes, colors. If your eyes are closed, you may be perceiving light, shadow. And there are smells that you may be perceiving. Noticing air coming in through your nose as you inhale, and the flow of air as you exhale. And there may be some taste, some aftertaste on your tongue. And another way you may know you're alive is by noticing what feelings, what emotions, what thought trains are arising moment to moment. Maybe there's the experience of calm in the mind, or maybe it's agitation, anxiety. Maybe there are feelings of well-being. Maybe there are neutral feelings, boredom. Maybe painful feelings, sorrow, guilt, frustration. Whatever may be in your mind, in your heart, in the emotional landscape, giving that space to just be as it is. to whatever extent you can. Turning inward to notice what's here and offering it your friendliness, curiosity, kind attention. And it can help to stay connected to your breathing or to the physical sensation of pressure on your seat to help you to meet whatever is here with a groundedness, with a steadiness. And I'll invite the sound of the bell. We can connect with our breathing and what it means to be truly alive right now. How might we answer that question differently now? Thank you all for your practice.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. Thank you for the invitation to slow down and to notice the ways that we know that we're alive. I'm excited to talk with you about action today. And I think what we might do here between both of us is kind of turn the preconceived notion of action upside down. The first thing that I am thinking about is what type of action is needed in these times.
Yeah. Well, there's a wonderful image of a bodhisattva in the Buddhist tradition, of a bodhisattva of great compassion. And this is a bodhisattva of action. You'll often see this bodhisattva. It could be male, female, kind of transgender. They appear in many different forms, but often they appear with thousands of arms. So like this big circle of arms, so many arms, and each arm has a different tool because there's so much that's needed to respond to suffering. This bodhisattva's task is to respond to suffering in the world. The name Avalokiteshvara means the one who listens to the cries of the world. So they respond by all these different means. There's a book in her hand, there's a light, a lamp in her hand, there's a balm of compassion. There's so many different ways, right? And this bodhisattva is really an archetype, meaning we all have the bodhisattva of compassion inside of us. We all can manifest this great compassion in all the different ways that each of us is called to offer our unique gifts. But the other thing that's there in this bodhisattva's hands is an eye. So you'll also see statues where every single hand has an eye in the palm of the hand, and that eye symbolizes wisdom, the ability to see clearly what is needed. Because we can take action out of anxiety, out of frustration, out of fear, and it will not be right action. It will not have the eye of wisdom in the palm. We can act out of reactivity, out of the need to, serve ourselves, our image of ourselves. There can be many motivations that are not helpful. And so I think the kind of action that is needed now, we definitely need action now, but it needs to come from this place of wisdom and compassion, both. So this sense of maybe even slowing down enough, right? It's counterintuitive. Why would you slow down if you want to take action? But you slow down so that you can make sure that where your action is coming from is clear and centered and, really for the good of all. That is what's needed, not for the good of one side. This way we have of othering. So how do we take action in a way that will support the whole? Right? I studied with shamans who were from Northern Europe, and they talked about being in a place where logging was happening of old growth trees, and that the shamanic way, they explained, was not to take the side of the trees against the loggers, but to do whatever would bring healing to everyone, but just to support the trees and support the loggers, because the loggers are interconnected with everything else. They're there because, there are people on boards of companies that are, they have families. So it's like seeing the whole picture rather than demonizing one side to protect another. That is acting with the eye of wisdom, with the eye of compassion, is what will bring healing to the whole situation, and not create more divisions, more suffering.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm thinking about how compassion means to suffer with, to be with, and I think a lot of the Shambhala warrior prophecy that Joanna Macy shares on behalf of her teachers, and similarly, they offer the invitation into insight and compassion, which is pretty much the same thing that you're inviting us to do here. And I think when we conventionally think of action, it's the rush to remove greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere, the rush to draw down, the rush to get on the front lines of a protest, contact our legislators, stop the Willow project, things like that. I'm wondering how this inner work, this commitment to wisdom and compassion might inform that type of action.
Yeah, I think it's all those things you named are really important and, and really needed. And I think whenever we can act with others, that's so helpful. if we can join others in engaging in actions. And really, I think really the only way we're going to meet the level of breakdown that is already happening and that will most likely continue to happen is by having strong relationships with others who care. And even if it's a group of 5 people, 4 people who you are regularly in touch with, and let's all, write to this congressperson together, or let's all, show up at this protest, or let's all, donate to whatever it is, like where you are more and more working in a collective. We just aren't, our nervous systems just aren't meant for this level of disruption. We can't handle this alone. It's just not what we were built for. We have to have communities where we can process this grief, where we can collectively start to take action and to make sense of. That's part of the, the wisdom in the poem is you can't always figure things out alone. What is the most compassionate or wise thing to do? You may need to sit with a group of people and say, well, there's this option, there's this option. How do we decide what's for the good of all? The more eyes you can get on that question, the closer you'll come to the truth, assuming that those people are also people who are trying to develop their minds and see the world clearly. I mean, there's an element of kind of being with others on a path, right? That is important, of being able to take, because a number of the things you mentioned involve meeting real destruction and harm in our world. And that has a corrosive effect on our minds and bodies and psyches. And so we need to be able to not just see the harm and address the harm, but we also need to be able to be in spaces that nourish our joy and nourish a sense of belonging and creativity, and what do we want instead of this, right? So there's a lot of things that we want to be keeping in mind when we engage in action. And I say this also, I was just on someone's podcast who was an environmental activist and had burned out doing this work after doing it for some decades, and mentioned, being on the front lines of protests. And these things are very important, and yet we need to support ourselves so that we have places that really can nourish the good, the sense of connection, the sense of possibility, to be in places that inspire us, because, the actions that are needed, and many of the ones you mentioned, if that's all we're doing, it will be hard to sustain that sense of energy and hope,
Yeah, I'm getting really excited by a lot of what you're saying. And I'm going to just keep citing Joanna Macy. I'm basically just her funnel today, apparently.
I love her too.
She's brought so much wisdom to so many of us. And she kind of breaks down action into 3 different types of actions. She says holding actions are the ones that we have been speaking about, the petitioning, the frontline activism, the nonviolent civil disobedience. Those types of things are holding actions. But there's 2 other types of actions that we need to explore and engage in simultaneously. And the second one is creating new structures that actually are life supporting. So this would be the social structures that we're engaging in. And then the third type of action is creating shifts in consciousness. Like, what questions are we asking? What are our collective values? And what I see from my own work is that the shifts in consciousness really inform the other 2. You can't build new structures if you're asking the wrong questions. You can't have sustained holding actions if you're asking harmful questions, or if your values are based in disconnection and trauma. We're seeing a lot of different types of trauma. I'm wondering if this is sparking anything for you.
I'm so happy you brought this up. You know, another way that the Buddhist Peace Fellowship frames those three ways of engaging is block, build, be. So the blocking is the holding, the building is creating new structures, and the being is just, you know, allowing this spaciousness for, you know, what you're saying is so crucial. It is really, if our minds aren't clear, back to the first thing I shared about, we can't make meaningful progress or action. And, you know, this quote of Einstein's, you can't solve a problem at the level at which it was created. And so to me, it comes so much back to how do we perceive, how do we see this? And I'm reminded of Donella Meadows' wonderful piece on the ways to intervene in a system. And that she said, you know, the most important way to intervene in a system is to transcend paradigms, to not just notice that you are operating from a paradigm, but to be able to transcend that paradigm. That anytime we're in a paradigm, we are limited, and that, you know, the most powerful thing we can do is to be able to break out of any kind of paradigm that we're in, whatever it might be. So to really be so open to all the possibilities that could arise, because the moment we latch onto one, we don't see the others. It doesn't mean we can't be effective and be making movement towards, you know, one, but staying open, you know, because we may be off. And if we aren't able to accept that there are new things coming into the system all the time, then we really may miss out on some crucial ways that we need to be able to be fluid and flexible. And so this comes back to this transcending paradigms is really the being part of the three, you know, the changing how we see, giving ourselves space to hold reality in new and different ways, because it is through how we see that things come into being. I mean, the Buddha said it's our mind creates this world. You know, Robert Gilman of the Context Institute has said there are no environmental problems. There are only environmental symptoms of human problems. So we have created the problems from our mind, from our way of seeing, from our paradigms, from our inability to be in this vaster, larger way, to really see the reality in its completely interconnected, interwoven nature. If we could see that, like the shamans, right? The whole system has to be held with healing and love. If we could see that, you know, we wouldn't be creating more problems that we then have to fix later.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how in order to transcend a paradigm, you must first realize that you're in a paradigm. You know, we can't transcend it unless we know we're operating with those rules and those norms. And I think that awakening, so two parts. One, how do we start even realizing we're operating within a cultures or a set of operating instructions that maybe we just fit into or plugged into? And then the second thing is, can you speak to the grief or the anger or the fear that happens when those operating instructions don't seem to be true or don't fit reality anymore? You know, we're like living in a time where a lot of the things we've grown up with or that we've been told aren't based in the biological laws of how the world operates. And so that naturally brings up a lot of discomfort. Wondering if you could speak to those things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's part of the human predicament that we aren't often. This is going back millennia, we often aren't in touch with reality. And our human societies, the more complex they have become, have taken us further and further from reality. The Buddha's insight 2,600 years ago was, we're not seeing things clearly. We're not living with the awareness of impermanence. We're not living with the awareness of interbeing, of our fundamental interconnectedness. And so that is, that has been with us well before the Industrial Revolution, and what got us on this road towards climate disaster. And I think there are things we can rely on, right? You're saying our society has told us things that aren't true. We're discovering that more and more, and we see so clearly we've actively been lied to by corporations like Exxon, and which was a very planned, very premeditated process of decades to keep the truth from coming out about what has caused climate change. But there are things that we can rely on if we, again, know how to come home to ourselves. This present moment will never let us down. If we know how to connect with what is here and now, that is where we can find the truth. So part of it is like, yes, there are structures that are crumbling, and there are, not always very trustworthy sources of information or, reliable leadership. And yet, life, this breath, this ability to take a step and know I'm taking a step, to drink my tea and know I'm drinking my tea, that is a place of stability. That is a place of truth. And so when we find ourselves frustrated, angry, in despair because of the hypocrisy or, the structures, the systems that are falling everywhere we look. Now we have the banks that are, sending us all trembling as one bank fails after another. But there is something inside of us that is not subject to that kind of disruption. And so I think the invitation when things start to get shaky outside and unreliable is to also cultivate a relationship with whatever that is within us, whatever words we use to describe it, that is not shakeable, is not corruptible. And so this coming home to our breath, to our body, to this present moment as a place of refuge, so that when we need to respond to the chaos around us, we have a place from which to do that. And we, again, back to the community, we need people who can also help us to process these strong emotions, who can also be there with us to remind us when we forget. I do have a home inside of myself that is a very deep and solid place of refuge.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how important it is to honor those feelings as teachers, as additional data points that have something to teach us.
Mm-hmm.
I think the dominant culture has a real aversion to sticking with and processing things like grief and despair, and we hold it at an arm's length instead of incorporating it and letting it move through us. We teach in Good Grief Network that feelings are a lot like a visitor who comes over for tea and they're welcome to enjoy tea with us, but they can't stay past that certain period. This session is focused a lot on climate grief, but you know, there are so many overlapping feelings that come back. I'm wondering if you can speak to what you know about emotional processing in these times and how that is a generative action in itself.
Yeah. You're so right that our difficult emotions are very important information and data points that we really need to pay attention to. I saw a beautiful drawing recently that it was a man sitting next to, I think, an elephant or something, and saying, I just figured out what was beneath my anger. And it was grief. No? And so we wouldn't know ourselves to be connected to the world around us if we didn't have these strong emotions. They're so crucial. They're so important to really honor them, because they show us that we love this planet. We love this landscape, you know, this earth that has supported us. And that's why we're angry. That's why we feel despair. That's why we feel grief. I mean, all those things are incredibly good. And if we didn't feel those things, then we, you know, that would be more worrisome in a way. Although numbness, you know, that's also one of those feelings that needs to be welcomed and honored. And it's part of how we respond when things get so difficult. We shut down. So all of that is important to be welcomed. And it is our tendency to move away from these feelings of pain and suffering. Even a single-celled organism moves away from what's uncomfortable. And so we don't want to give ourselves a hard time for that tendency. And yet it is only through meeting these painful emotions with that same eye of wisdom and compassion that will allow them to be transmuted and transformed into really powerful sources of energy for us to take action. One of the things I love that Thomas Hübl, an Austrian teacher, talks about is that each generation's unhealed trauma is like it gets frozen. And then the next generation, they have a layer of trauma that gets frozen, and then the next and the next. And he says, beneath all of those frozen layers of trauma are all the solutions that we already have them to meet all of the difficulties we have, economic, you know, climate, racial, you know, all of them are beneath these, you know, multiple layers of frozen trauma. And so it's only through developing, first of all, the spiritual disciplines and the collective disciplines that help us to meet these painful emotions, that melts the ice. We have to actually go towards these things that are painful. That melts the ice. And we can heal previous generations of trauma as well, because they exist in us. So it's by moving towards these painful experiences that this, you know, ice can melt and we can access everything that we need, which we already have. We already have it. You know, it's already in us. But it's through the healing that potential, that power will be accessible to us. So it's really by going very much towards our difficulty. And Andy, you mentioned the mud and the lotus at the beginning of your introductions. And that's exactly, you know, the lotus cannot come except through the mud. And so the mud is this despair, is this, you know, anger, this anguish, this anxiety. That is where we need to, you know, really turn, so that a lotus of real awakening and you know, this transcending of paradigms, that's a lotus that's able to say, hey, we don't have to be caught in any of these ways of seeing. We can move beyond that and be so free that we can see what needs to be done, what needs to be undone.
I am just jotting notes down the entire time that you're speaking. One of my questions for you was, what is one small sweet step that everyone can take? But you've given us several, and I'm by no means have captured them all, but I'll just repeat some back. Obviously moving towards maybe the things that scare us, or the things that we don't necessarily want to feel, but there might be some potential for growth or wisdom in there. The opportunity to melt that layer of ice that we've inherited, and then maybe the next layer of ice. Cultivating practices of wisdom and compassion, and then community connection, or rather connecting to people who can support us and offer us additional points of wisdom, because perhaps our own wisdom is limited. And I love the invitation to come back to the present moment as a sense of agency, and the present moment and our breath as a meaningful action that we can take in this time. I know that did not get everything you said, but I'm
good.
Well, thank you for sharing that wisdom. I'm wondering if there's anything else bubbling up for you that we can leave the folks that are here with us today, or watching the recording. What other actions, small sweet actions, can we take in these times?
Well, I would say find out, spend some time exploring what really brings you joy. What are you really passionate about, connected to life on our planet? Whether it's racial justice, or, you love children and you want to be supportive of children, or you have elderly parents and you want to make sure they're well cared for, or maybe it's your passion for frogs, or maybe it's the water, or maybe it's air quality, or working to make sure people don't have to spend time in prison when they don't need to be there. Or I think finding what really brings you alive, right? And seeing how you can spend more of your time doing that, working towards things that you love. And maybe to also just remember a place that you loved as a young person, or that you love now, and what would it take to really spend time there with the living world, and to ask that place where you should be, what involve that place, or even that species, or that community of beings to help guide you. And I'll just name that I'm part of a new program, 18-month kin-centric leadership program. I'm just facilitating one of the retreats, but it's an 18-month leadership training to look at how can we see ourselves as embedded within a larger web, and see ourselves as kin with all species, not above. So thank you for putting that link in the chat. So relying on other species also. Maybe you choose one species to really connect with, and figure out how to connect with that species every day, or on a very regular basis, whether it's in meditation, on a walk, whether it's maybe communing with that species, so like how to involve this sense of really being, we have to figure out this journey with all the species on this planet. It's not just humans who have to figure out what we're going to do. So we can draw on the wisdom that's there in this life that's around us. So falling in love, what is it that you love? Letting that really guide you, guide your actions, and nourish your actions, and then calling on other species, being present with other species to help guide and nourish your actions. Those are two things I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Kaira Jewel. Those are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful actions that we can take. I had the opportunity to meet some ancient redwoods a year ago or 2 years ago, and I just remember you can sit in them. They're so big. You can sit inside a redwood tree. And I sat there for a long time and just remembered that in my 3 some odd decades, I'm so limited. My perspective is so limited. My eyes half closed. And yet to sit with the redwood tree who's been there for 1,500 years, you know, what does that redwood tree know about uncertainty and change? And, you know, what loss has that redwood experienced? And yet it's still upright and it's still strong. And yeah, I've really held that idea in my heart since being able to meet that tree.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to be in conversation with you much longer, but I think we're gonna move to the breakout room portion, and I'm grateful for your insight. And I think we should plug your book one more time. We were made for these times. My camera's blurred, so you can't see it, but I'll put it in the chat if one of the Reimagine folks don't get to it right away. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, I think it goes back to you.
Yes, Kaira Jewel, I think you have to go, and we're so grateful for your wisdom. LaUra, I'm so grateful for teasing out such a rich conversation with Kaira Jewel today for all of us. So thank you.
Appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
So yes, we are going to move now into the breakout sessions. Yes, so let me get this going. We have a set of prompts for all of you. And I believe when you do go into the breakout rooms, if you choose to go into them, I'll be hanging out probably with my colleague Misha, perhaps LaUra in the main room. You don't all have to go in, but the option is there for you. If you are in and you're struggling, there is an ask for help button when you're in the breakout room. So just reach out. So let me get this started. And thank you for all of you who are staying for this session. You've populated the chat with many interesting reflections and questions, and I think you'll be able to share that with folks in your group.
Andy, may I interrupt you for a second? I think before we put people into breakout rooms, if people want to save the chat, to do that beforehand, because the chat leaves sometimes when you go into breakout rooms.
Thank you for that tip.
Yeah.
Good idea. So I think we decided, LaUra, that we're going to have around 4 to 5 people within each room, and we're going to end at 2:15. Hopefully we'll have some time for some group sharing after you've been in the breakout room for roughly, let's say, 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to get this going, and then we'll perhaps, Misha, if you're still able to, if you can put in the chat some of those prompt questions, and then I will, there we go. And then I will also use the broadcast messaging function when you're in the breakout room, so those questions will repeat. So we've got 8 breakout rooms in total. I'm going to start creating them. I'm going to open the rooms, and you'll have the option to enter. And you'll go off into space, and then you'll all come back.
I'm wondering if anyone is interested in sharing with us how they process their climate grief and how they find opportunities to learn and grow amidst all of this chaos. You can raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
I meditate, and I am growing since the pandemic in my awareness of my theory of everything and how to process it, because I can only change myself. I can only be comfortable with myself. The more comfortable I am with myself, the more knowledgeable and aware I am of myself and accept change, then that has a spreading effect, because I believe that I am writing this story. I am controlling this, actually. Everything is happening as a result of my frequency. So that's why visualization works. I visualize this. I explain this to as many people as possible. I'm on YouTube, Neil Gilfillan, Gilfillan. Lots of videos explaining my theories and meditations on Buddhism, which is Zen Taoism, and things of that nature. But my own take is that this is an electron. We are just experiencing this. So the healthier I make myself, and the more other people see what I am doing and open to what I am doing, maybe they'll begin to accept it as they're falling asleep at night. And we expect, and I find losing expectations is a big part of this awareness. We expect.
Neil, can you take a minute or two and summarize what you're going to say so we can get to some other people before we close out today?
This is the most important part. We expect that what we say, when we talk to people and try to press our points and stuff, that they're going to fall in line or acknowledge it right then. People don't do that. They acknowledge it a week later, a month later, while they're falling asleep. So lose that expectation. We're not arguing, we're discussing. We're passing ideas. Whatever ideas work with other people, they do. But if this begins to work for people and people calm down, others will put it more intention on it. And it may have a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the only thing I think that'll work.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your opinions. And I'm curious if anybody else is interested in stepping up and sharing how they process their climate grief and what learning there is to be had from processing it, from touching it. I see some great resources coming into the chat. There was somebody with their hand up. Is that person still here?
Hi, I'm Karen. And I didn't have a way. I was actually asking my group, and I heard a lot of really good feedback, because I'm on, on behalf of, my young girls and how to keep them elevated and hopeful. And I heard a lot of good stuff about connecting with nature and, living this life richly and fully, because we're here now, and giving them space to talk about their feelings. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I see another hand.
I wanted to say that I'm not here as a foil or anything, but I really did go through the Good Grief Network process twice, and I found it really helpful. And that's LaUra's organization. And so that's truly was helpful. And it taught me a lot about self-care and how that connects with grief, and also feeling the actual feelings of grief. And then, kind of balancing those two. I mean, there's more, but those two pieces, I think the actual feeling, the process of it, and community, the importance of community and being held by people who kind of get what's happening for you. So that's, so I did want to throw that out. Thank you, LaUra.
Yeah, thank you, Penny. All right, we have time for one more. Mary Jo.
This just reinforces what we've been saying here today, that idea of keeping to talk about things, because I heard from some wisdom figure that everybody thinks that only 1/3 or less of the world cares about this. But when you really ask a majority of people, at least 2/3 of the world think this is important, but nobody talks about it because they only think it's a 1/3 world, 1/3 population concern. So the more we talk about it, we gain that momentum to get the critical mass. And then we start to construct something different, not to tear down what exists, because we can't tear down what is stronger than us, but we offer something else. And that's how to bring about change. And so I just cling to that hope and continue to talk and hope for something new that we can build together. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Jo, and thank you to everyone who came. I think I'll hand it back to Andy for any last minute things before we close out. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for everyone who just shared now, everyone who stuck around to participate in these small group conversations. And Mary Jo, thank you for those words of hope as we close this out. I pasted in the chat earlier the link to this series. I hope you'll join us next Wednesday for Laura's workshop. And I wish you all a beautiful, hopeful day. Take care, everybody.